You've probably heard that ancient humans lived short, miserable lives, no comfort, no safety, nothing worth wanting. That's wrong. And this tooth is the proof. Those lines inside it aren't decay. They're a recorded crisis, a moment, centuries ago, when a child's body nearly failed. And once you know how to read it, this single tooth can tell you more about what ancient people valued than any museum plaque ever could. Everything you're about to see is pulled directly from actual bioarchaeology bones, teeth, and DNA that scientists have spent decades decoding. Not myths, not guesses. And what they reveal is stranger than the myth ever was. A dynasty that ruled for 300 years through women only. A game piece rolled across a stone court that decided who got buried like royalty. A earthwork so precisely aligned to the moon that modern engineers still double-check the maths. All of it built by people who had zero say in whether they'd eat tomorrow. Right now, somewhere, a kid is waking up to an alarm they didn't have to build, drinking water they didn't have to carry, standing in a room that's warm because a machine decided it should be. None of that took effort. None of it took risk. It's just there. Now imagine that same morning, but the water isn't in a pipe, it's 2 miles away, down a trail, and someone in your family has to walk there and back before anything else happens today. The warmth in the room isn't automatic, it's a fire that someone kept alive all night because if it went out in the winter, people didn't wake up at all. And the food isn't in a fridge. It doesn't exist yet. Somebody has to go get it, right now, or your family doesn't eat. This wasn't a survival show. This wasn't a bad week. For thousands of years across North America, this was just life, every single day. And here's the part almost nobody tells you. The people living that life weren't worse off in every way. In some ways scientists can now actually measure they were more secure than we are. That sounds impossible, so let's prove it. Start with the most basic thing a person needs, to not freeze to death. In a modern home, heat is a setting on a wall. For a family in ancient North America, heat was a living thing you had to feed, protect, and never, ever lose. Fire didn't just keep people warm, it made hard, toxic plant starches safe to eat. It preserved meat for winter, it kept predators away in the dark. Losing your fire in the middle of a freezing night wasn't an inconvenience, it could be a death sentence for the whole family. So gathering fuel wasn't a chore. It was hours of labor, every single day that simply had to happen, no matter how tired you were. And it wasn't just fire. Even something as small as footwear was a matter of life and death. In Great Basin cave sites in Nevada and Oregon, archaeologists have found sandals woven from sagebrush fiber engineered generations before rubber or leather boots existed to stop frostbite and foot injuries. Here's why that mattered so much. In a world where your legs were your only transportation, a single untreated foot wound could turn into an infection that ended your ability to hunt, gather, or run. And in that world, that wasn't just painful, it could be fatal. Compare that to today. We treat a blister as an afterthought. They treated it as a 5-alarm emergency because it was. That single difference in stakes changes everything about how a person thinks, moves, and plans their entire day. And once you understand how seriously the smallest injury was taken, the next question becomes obvious. If losing a shoe could kill you, what happened when the food ran out completely? Around 8000 BC in what's now eastern Colorado, a group of hunters did something that sounds almost cinematic. They didn't chase down one animal. They drove an entire herd more than 190 bison into a narrow arroyo, a natural trap in the landscape where the animals piled up and couldn't escape. That single event produced over 50,000 pounds of meat, fat, and marrow. Think about that number for a second. That's not a meal. That's not even a week of meals. Done right smoked, dried, turned into portable, long-lasting food that single hunt could carry an entire community through a brutal winter. Done wrong, if the timing was off by even a season, families starved. This is why ancient people didn't wander randomly. Their entire year was mapped around animal migrations and plant ripening because getting the timing wrong wasn't just annoying, it was catastrophic. Everything about their calendar existed to answer one question. Will we eat? Eventually, some groups found a different answer to that question, not hunting, but growing. Maize agriculture spread through the woodland and Mississippian periods, and it changed everything. Bigger, denser communities, surplus food stored underground. Cities like Cahokia became possible because of it. But here's the twist almost nobody expects. This wasn't a straightforward upgrade. Scientists can actually see the cost of that trade-off preserved in bone. And it starts with the most vulnerable people in any society, the children. Remember that tooth from the very beginning of this video? Here's how scientists actually read it. When a baby nurses, their bones and teeth absorb a chemical signature slightly heavier nitrogen isotopes than their own mother's body carries. It sounds technical, but it means something simple. Scientists can look at ancient teeth and know, almost to the month, when a child stopped breastfeeding thousands of years ago. And what they've found is that weaning the moment a child moved off breast milk and onto solid food happened between 2 and 4 years old, depending on the culture. In farming communities that relied heavily on maize, that's exactly the moment things went wrong. Maize gruel filled a toddler's stomach, but it was missing key nutrients and it introduced their immature immune system to waterborne bacteria they'd never faced before. The result shows up permanently in the skeleton. Horizontal defects in tooth enamel called linear enamel hypoplasia, literally a frozen record of the moment a child's body was under so much stress that growth stopped. At sites like Dixon Mounds in Illinois, this shows up again and again in children aged 2 to 5. Now put a number on that. Across ancient North America, somewhere between half and 60% of children didn't survive to age 15. Read that again. More than half, that means every single child who did make it past weaning wasn't just a baby growing up, they were a small miracle, and everyone around them knew it. This is why kinship mattered so intensely, because a child's survival was never just one mother's job. It was the whole extended family's responsibility, every single day, for years. And that single fact starts to explain something much bigger than parenting. It explains why, in some of these societies, women weren't just caretakers. They were the literal foundation of power itself. In Chaco Canyon, New Mexico, stands Pueblo Bonito, a structure with over 600 rooms, 4 stories tall, built between 850 and 1150 AD. For a long time, historians assumed leadership here worked the way it did almost everywhere else in the ancient world, passed from father to son. Then scientists sequenced ancient DNA from the burial chamber known as Room 33. And what they found rewrote the story completely. The high-status individuals buried there across more than 300 years shared identical mitochondrial DNA. That's the genetic marker passed only from mother to child. In other words, this wasn't a father-to-son dynasty at all. It was a mother-to-daughter dynasty, ruling continuously for 3 centuries. 300 years is longer than the entire history of the United States, and it ran entirely through women at a time when almost every textbook assumption said that couldn't happen. It gets stranger. Some of the individuals buried here had 6 toes on one foot, a trait called polydactylism. Instead of being hidden or treated as unusual, it was celebrated. It shows up in rock art, in ceramic figures, even pressed deliberately into wet plaster on the walls, as if to say, this body was touched by something sacred. Status here wasn't inherited land or a bank balance. It was spiritual meaning, written directly onto the body and passed down through blood that only mothers could carry. And Chaco wasn't alone in rewriting what we thought we knew about power. 900 miles away in what's now Illinois, an entire burial mound was about to prove the same point, with something even harder to ignore. At Cahokia, once the largest city north of Mexico, home to as many as 20,000 people, archaeologists found a burial mound called Mound 72. The first interpretation, decades ago, was simple. A powerful male warrior chief, laid to rest on a bed of 20,000 shell beads, surrounded by sacrificed followers. Modern reanalysis, using better forensic techniques, told a different story. The central burial wasn't one man. It was a male and female pair, laid together, surrounded by other burials of both sexes. This wasn't a single ruler, it was shared elite leadership, and it had been misread as just a chief for years, simply because everyone assumed power had to look male. The shell beads themselves, nearly 49,000 of them, made from whelk shells hauled from the Gulf of Mexico, 800 miles away, were arranged in the shape of a falcon. That symbol connected these rulers directly to the upper world, the realm of sky, sun, and celestial power in their belief system. But this discovery also forces us to be honest about something harder to sit with. Nearby, archaeologists uncovered mass graves, one containing 53 young women, all between 15 and 25 years old, along with other individuals who showed signs of violent death. This wasn't an egalitarian, peaceful society in every sense of the word. It was a stratified one with real winners and real victims, and the same bones that prove women held power also prove that power came at a devastating cost to others. That's the uncomfortable truth. Bioarchaeology keeps surfacing. These societies weren't the disease-free, perfectly equal paradise some romantic retelling describe. And they weren't the primitive, meaningless struggle other stereotypes describe either. They were complex, capable of astonishing achievement and brutal hierarchy, sometimes within the same square mile of dirt. And that complexity becomes even clearer when you look up literally at what these same people were capable of building in the sky. In Ohio, between 100 BC and 400 AD, the Hopewell culture built something that, from ground level, just looks like grass-covered ridges. From the air, it's a geometric complex covering 3,000 acres larger than most modern towns. Here's what makes it almost unbelievable. The moon doesn't rise in the same spot. Every month, its rising point drifts back and forth over a cycle that takes 18 and a half years to complete. Astronomers Ray Hively and Robert Horn discovered that the main sight line of the Newark octagon lines up with the northernmost point of that cycle to within half a degree of accuracy. To build that with that kind of precision, someone had to observe the moon's position year after year for at least 18 straight years, likely much longer, and pass that knowledge down through people who had no writing system at all. That means the accuracy baked into this earthwork isn't the achievement of one genius. It's the achievement of grandparents teaching grandchildren, patiently, for generations, with nothing but memory and oral tradition as their save file. Now here's the contrast that should stop you in your tracks. We have satellites, supercomputers, and instant access to every fact humanity has ever recorded. And most of us couldn't tell you which direction the moon rose last month. They had none of that. And they tracked it more precisely than most people alive today ever will. Choice didn't do that, necessity did. When your planting season, your ceremonies, and your community's entire rhythm depended on getting the sky right, you didn't have the option of not paying attention. And that distinction, knowledge that has to work versus knowledge you can look up and forget 5 minutes later, might be the most important idea in this entire story. Which brings us back to the question this whole video has been building toward. So here's the myth, laid bare. We assume that because ancient people had no choice, no comfort, no convenience, no guarantee they'd survive the week, their lives must have been worse than ours in every way. The evidence doesn't support that. Not entirely. Because they had no choice, a lost child was never just one mother's tragedy, it belonged to an entire kinship network built to prevent it from happening again. Because they had no choice, hoarding food while your neighbor starved wasn't just frowned upon, it was almost unthinkable, because everyone's survival was visibly, undeniably tied together. Because they had no choice, knowledge had to be exact, passed down with total seriousness, because a wrong guess about the seasons could kill the whole community, not just embarrass someone at dinner. We, on the other hand, have almost total choice. We choose who to help. We choose whether to remember what our grandparents taught us. We choose every day whether to show up for the people around us, and study after study shows that a huge number of us are choosing isolation, even surrounded by more comfort and more connection technology than any humans in history. That's the trade nobody talks about. Ancient people paid for their security with their bodies' bad teeth, brutal child mortality, backs worn down by decades of low-bar, all visible today in their bones. We've paid for our comfort with something quieter, something that doesn't show up on an X-ray, the tight, forced, absolutely necessary bond between one human being and the people who kept them alive. They never had the luxury of forgetting they needed each other. Maybe that's the real difference between having no choice and having every choice in the world, and maybe the real question isn't which one of us had it worse. It's which one of us actually understood what mattered.